Hi, Christina. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. I don't know if is Wendy still planning to join, or are you gonna move the
She's
show
not
today?
able to join, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, so it'll just be me.
Okay.
I'm gonna go ahead. I think I have
You
screen
should have the power. Yep.
privileges. My whole desktop. Okay. All right, so hi. My name is Christina Michael. I am an English professor at Hostos Community College in CUNY, and I work on the faculty and curriculum development for Manifold. And Manifold is a digital publishing platform that is a joint project between the Graduate Center at CUNY, University of Minnesota Press, Cast Iron Coding, and Cast Iron Coding. It's Mellon funded, and it's currently under a grant at CUNY with the National Endowment of the Humanities to develop specifically as a teaching platform. It was originally developed for university presses to publish open access monographs. And I should say, I'll take questions at the end. I'll be very happy to take questions. So if you can put them in the chat or just remember them. And I'll go through this spiel. So Manifold software is grant funded. It's not for profit, and it's 100% open source. So what that means is similar to the Commons. Manifold is not harvesting or profiting from instructor or student data, and it's dedicated to increasing access to educational resources and materials. So here's a sense of the team at the three institutions. So it's the Graduate Center at CUNY, University of Minnesota Press, and Cast Iron Coding. Zach Davis, who is the head developer at Cast Iron Coding, is actually a Graduate Center alum. He has a PhD in Milton, and he left the Grad Center ABD and went back to Portland and founded Cast Iron Coding. And Manifold came out of the first publication of Debates in the Digital Humanities, which Matt Gold edited with University of Minnesota Press. And Matt really wanted there to be an open access version of the text that could bring the scholarly conversation into the margins of the text, and that could also host all of the digital artifacts and websites and projects that were discussed in the book in the text itself. So he turned to Zach for help with this, and Manifold was born out of that. And I like to tell that story just because it highlights the way in which like pedagogy and the humanities and community are really at the heart of the Manifold project. And to give you a sense of the structure of the project, this team here develops the Manifold software, and then that software is distributed to the different institutions who have instances of Manifold. So it's similar to the way in which there's a central set of software that is something like Blackboard, and then each institution has its own instance of Blackboard that's separate from the other instances. Something I usually get a lot of questions about. I'm happy to answer other questions about it later. But so similarly, users of Manifold include university presses, digital humanities centers, and university libraries across America and Canada and internationally. And to give you a sense of how people are using Manifold, here's some examples of what people are making with Manifold. So at University of Minnesota Press, they're using Manifold to deliver their growing catalog of open access books. So all their open access books are on Manifold. California's Digital Library is publishing medical texts with animated resources. CUNY is publishing scholarly student editions of historical texts for classroom use, among other projects there. And Affordable Learning Georgia is publishing open access textbooks to replace their commercial options. Manifold as a software, its broad project goals are to push digital publishing beyond the static PDF, and other modes of digital publishing that try to mimic the physical book and instead create something of and for the web that takes advantage of its ability to show scholarship as an iterative process and to allow authors to bring dynamic multimedia resources into their texts themselves, as well as an elegant interface that allows readers to interact with each other and the text. So it's really bringing the scholarly conversation into the text. Also through Manifold instances that are dedicated to teaching. So these include CUNY, University of Washington, and Open Accessible Learning Georgia. Manifold is dedicated to expanding access to educational materials by providing instructors with free and easy to use platform that allows them to create these beautiful, interactive, and customized versions of course texts for their courses. And importantly, to bring student voices into the text that they're teaching and the text that different institutions have as their library of texts for teaching through annotations. So at this point, I'm going to take a moment to demo Manifold so you can get a sense of how it works and what it looks like. So I'm going to switch to my browser. So this text is one that we often use to demo Manifold because they are using they make a really good use of Manifold's Manifold's interactivity. So this text is metagaming. It was published by University of Minnesota Press. It's about video games. All Manifold's organized into projects, and projects can be one or more texts. So in this case, the project is one text. It's this book, Metagaming, and this is its open access version. It's also published in print. So the homepage for every project is organized into blocks, and the blocks are customizable. So this top block is the header. It's every project has a header. Many projects only have a header, but some projects have other blocks below them. So the header has the title, it has the subtitle, it has the author's names, it has a bunch of buttons. So one of the buttons is for read online. It goes right into the text. So a lot of instructors will create projects that are just one text and they don't have any other materials. So their project homepage will just be the title, a paragraph explaining things to their students, and then a button that gets the students into the text. But it can be much more dynamic than that. They have links here to their Twitter feeds. They also have links to other websites over here. Here's the cover of the text. And then down here is a hashtag metagaming. So you can set up a Manifold project to pull in tweets from Twitter with a particular hashtag. And that can be really useful in a teaching context to kind of demonstrate the social life that texts have. So this text, for instance, has a pretty active life on social media. So the content block that this project has chosen to use underneath the header is this recent activity blocks that pulls in those tweets from the internet. And then below that are the resources. So I'm going to show you how you can embed the resources into the texts page, but you can also collect them on the home page, and you can collect them in different resource collections. So here they decided to collect the resources by video game that they discuss. So the resources are here on the home page by video game, but they're also, as you'll see, embedded throughout the text in the margins. And then you can have the table of contents here, and you can have metadata. So now I'll show you the reading interface. Okay, so you can see the text appears in the center of the screen, and the highlighted portions are portions that are highlighted, and the places that are underlined show places where people have left annotations in the margin. And then you can see as you scroll down, there are places where there are blocks, and those blocks indicate that there is a resource that is in the margin. And the resources can be videos, they can be images, they can be links, They can be interactive, like Giphies, and you can actually embed quizzes in the margins through resources. And when you click on it, it opens up in this other screen. And when you click close, you're still in the same place. So it's a nice way for students to get supplementary materials without being entirely pulled out of the text. And you can really use this to make a kind of like one-stop shop for your readings, for your courses, so that all of the articles, videos, other things like that, that you would like your students to think about at particular moments in the text are there from the beginning. Then, oh, and I'll show you. So yeah, it can be a video, which down here, it's always lower than I expect, just to give you a sense of what it looks like when it is a video. So here's the trailer of the movie that they were discussing. And it plays right in the screen, or they can go to YouTube to see it. And then they X out and they're still in the text. Up here in the upper left-hand corner is the table of contents that falls along the left side of the screen. And in the upper right-hand side are a bunch of controls for the way that the text appears. So if you click on the eye, you can see your highlight. You can turn off viewing your highlights, annotations, the resources, and reading groups, which I'll talk about in just a second. So you can toggle all of these off, which is really nice because you can get as dynamic or as simple of a reading experience as you want. Some people find it really overwhelming to come to the text with all of this, all of these resources and interactive elements with their first pass. So I have students who will tell me that they'll turn everything off and read it through once, and then they'll go back and turn on the annotations and see what people have said, or if I left questions or comments, etc. You can change the text, like the font and the size. You can go into dark mode or light mode. You can change the margin. So this is an important element of Manifold, especially for teaching, is that it's responsive, which means that it changes for the size of the browser. And this means that it displays as well on a cell phone as it does on a tablet, as it does on your computer, which is really important, especially at CUNY, because more and more students are doing a lot of their work on their phones or their tablets, and they're not on their computers. It's like I've had a student who read Moby Dick on his phone, and you can do that on Manifold much more easily than if it were a PDF or other digital reading platforms. To give you a sense of what this looks like in a teaching context, here is a poem by Elizabeth Acevedo called Hair. And you can see this is actually from my class. So I embedded a video of Elizabeth Acevedo reading the text. So students can listen to it as well as read it. And then you can see that so the green comments are students' comments, annotations, and the blue underline is where I left questions. And you can go through, you can have students, annotate wherever they feel compelled to, but you can also insert discussion questions. So you can actually have, you can use Manifold instead of like discussion boards in Blackboard or something like that. And I find, I teach literature, so I find that students tend to read more carefully, and their comments are like naturally more oriented towards the text itself when they're annotating, because they have the text right there and they're highlighting it. So you can see here I posted a question, and then students responded. And it just gives a really nice way of creating a customized course version of texts that meets your students exactly where they are. So you might know that your students are going to get confused in a particular moment, or that you want to make connections to other things that you've read. You can do that when you're creating a customized course version in Manifold. So generally people are using Manifold in teaching contexts to publish dynamic, customized course editions of text in the public domain. It ensures accessibility, so students can read their materials on their phones or their mobile devices. They don't necessarily need to have an internet connection. They can do it on Wi-Fi. It can also help to create text-based conversations with collaborative annotations, and people also are using Manifold to publish student work. So there's several ways to use Manifold in the classroom. It gives you the opportunity to really teach annotating as a skill. Annotating is a really important skill for college readiness and for critical reading skills, and it often gets overlooked as a skill that we actually teach. And using collaborative annotations allows you to have conversations about what makes a productive annotation. And it allows students to also get practice speaking to and with the texts that they're going to use. My students are often tell me that they go back to the annotations before they have to write essays. It lets them know that even if they don't think they have something to say about a text, they already do and have. And there's different ways that you can teach annotations. You can leave specific prompts throughout and ask students to respond, or you can ask students to leave prompts for their classmates and respond as a kind of like discussion leading. You can also integrate social media through Twitter, and you can have students collaborate to create a rich text edited version of a course text. So the students can work together to bring together the resources and embed them throughout. So some examples of the ways people have used Manifold, and I showed you a little clip from mine. Here is a Manifold version of selections from Petrarch's poetry. So this is an Italian professor who teaches the same 75 of Petrarch's 200 plus poems. She was able to create a Manifold version that only includes the 75 poems that she teaches. And she included an audio clip of somebody reading Petrarch's poetry to each poem, as well as other resources that will help her students to understand. And especially in a foreign language class, it's really nice that they get to hear it as well as read it. This was a project in an American Studies course. It's called The Negro and the Nation. So this by Hubert Harrison. This professor took this text that was actually out of print and created a digital version of it. And he asked his class, as they went through different American Studies approaches to understanding texts, to go through and annotate with resources that displayed that approach to understanding the text. Libros en Español is a project at CUNY to create a compendium of Spanish language texts for students, for professors to use and draw from. It has over 100 texts now. And Structuring Student Equality is a collection of final essays for a class, for a graduate class at the Grad Center. So this was really nice because it sort of raised the stakes of the final essay. So these students now have this polished professional version of their final texts that have been collected. And they also got some digital skills in learning how to create a version. So in creating, the most common way in which people are using Manifold is to use it to create a course reader with resources and collaborative annotations. So when you do this, you can add each text as its own text. So I was saying that a project can have one text or many texts. Here's an example of a project that has many texts. So each text that the class read got its own, and you can get from this screen a kind of global sense of the engagement. So you can see there's 183 comments, 51 highlights for the Decameron, for instance. And then what's really nice too is that you get as well the ability to see this sort of back end of the reading groups. So one of the features that's really nice for teaching in Manifold is that you can create reading groups for your students. They can either be public or private, and you can remove them or archive them at the end of a semester, so you can reuse the same text over and over again. And when you use reading groups, you get this sort of dashboard of student participation. So you can see in this course, the students are listed on the left. I blacked out their names, even though it is a public reading group. You can see how many annotations they've created. And if you click on their names, you can see all of the annotations that they've created, and you can filter for which text you're looking at. And you can go through, and it makes grading really easy. Other things you can do with Manifold in the classroom is you can use it to collab, since it's open, as opposed to like a learning management system, you can use it to collaborate across course sections and campuses. So this is a version of Benito Serini that was created between faculty at several community colleges at CUNY. And so the instructors went through and left resources that were specific to community college students at CUNY trying to understand this text. And then they encouraged students to engage with each other. And it was really interesting to see how different classes naturally ended up commenting in different ways on the text and focusing on different parts of the text. And so you can see here, so one of the instructors, Craig Bernardini, left a comment, and then another one of the instructors responded. And I think it's a nice way for students to see professors talking to each other about the text. And then a student jumped in below that. And then also you can see here along the right-hand side, are the tags for each of the reading groups. So these are students from different reading groups from different courses talking to each other in the margins. And that was a nice way to see like that the students weren't alone in what they were confused about, and to have these conversations. Here's another screenshot of Libros en Español, and there's over 100 texts now. So one of the things that has been really nice about creating Manifold at CUNY is that it allows instructors to create their own materials, but it also allows the institution to create a library of texts that really reflects where the students are and where the faculty, like who the faculty are and what they want to be represented. So it's been, in the last year or two, Manifold has spent a lot of time thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So our graduate student fellow is working on a project for her dissertation that she's putting on Manifold called Testimonio in Women of Color Archive. And we've just given a lot of thought about creating the library of works at Manifold to reflect the student body at CUNY, as well as the instructors. And another way in which that works is that in the annotation function, we're bringing the student voices into the text itself in ways that our student body, which is in most of the institutions at CUNY majority minority, usually don't feel like they have a big purchase on the types of text that they're learning in class. And this way they literally leave their marks, and then future students come in and see that other students who were in their position have already commented on and had some ownership of the text in question. So this is some of the other DEI and accessibility work we've been doing. And accessibility in general has been a major focus of Manifold in the last few years. We've been collaborating with the University of Washington. We have more than 100 commits now of ensuring that our platform is accessible to people using assistive technology like screen readers, and that is now central to the way that we develop going forward. So we've been using it to fix issues that arose in previous development, and going forward now it's a central part of our development. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation. If you want to learn more about Manifold, I'll be sharing these slides with you as well. And the website here at CUNY.manifold app, or sorry, not CUNY, it should just say manifoldapp.org will take you to our marketing site where you can learn more about Manifold. But actually, if you're curious about how people are using it for teaching, going to CUNY.manifoldapp.org, you can explore there and see all the different ways in which people are using it.
Thank you, Christina. That was really great. We do have a couple questions in the chat. So Brian was wondering if Manifold is utilizing Hypothesis or if it has its own sort of custom annotation tool built into it.
Yeah, so Manifold has its own native annotation tool. And the reason for that is because Hypothesis, I love Hypothesis. Hypothesis is great for annotating the open web. So anything that is on the web, you can annotate using Hypothesis, but those annotations are only as stable as that website. So having an internal annotation tool allows you to know that the annotations aren't going anywhere because the text isn't going anywhere. Yeah, and so the other way to sort of distinguish understanding what Hypothesis is doing from what Manifold is doing is that Hypothesis lets you annotate the open web, whereas Manifold is a publishing platform first and foremost that has an annotation feature. Does that make sense?
Okay. Does Manifold have tools for interactivity, like formative assessment and other aspects like that?
So like quizzes, is that the idea? Yeah. So Manifold doesn't have anything for quizzes built into it, but you can embed like iframes into Manifold, and you could embed, people have embedded quizzes that way. So that students can sort of check for understanding and stuff like that. The only thing is that because it's an iframe, it will only have a record of who did what in the quiz if that's part of the tool that's being embedded, because it's not in Manifold. Yeah.
Brian is asking, what are some of the differences between this platform and other OER publishing platforms? For example, we've heard recently from Pressbooks and LibreText and others.
Right. So one of the differences is that from many of the other publishing options is the fact that Manifold is a scroll. A lot of the scroll and the resources get embedded into the page. So a lot of publishing platforms will have like a separate tab for resources or videos or something like this. Manifold keeps everything together, and it's open source, and it is often cheaper for institutions than other options as well.
Okay, thanks. Jonathan was wondering if the books made in Manifold can be exported to different formats like EPUB and PDF and other things like that.
Can a book made in Manifold be exported? So you can use many different file formats to create a Manifold text. So you can use EPUB, Word documents, Google Documents, Markdown, HTML, and the verb we use for it is ingest. You ingest those files to create your Manifold text, and then those live in a project. There's no way to download the whole project into another format that includes like the resources and different things like that. But what you can do is you can include a button in, for instance, like the header block that I showed you, that is a download button, so that your students or whoever is reading the Manifold project can download whatever you want, but you can use, like the PDF or the Word document or the Google document file that you use to create the project. You can download it there. So students can have that as an option for reading offline if they want to. But yeah, there's no way to, once it's created as a Manifold project and has the different layers, there's no way to download that as a separate as a separate file. And I should say actually about PDFs, PDF is one file that you cannot use to create a manifold text. And that's because it's, by definition static. And so like manifold, we use the verb ingest because it kind of takes the text and changes it. And that's why it's responsive and so flexible, but it makes it so we can't use PDFs, although you can add a PDF as like a resource, and like embed it or have it alongside your manifold text.
Great. Jonathan was also wondering, we saw mostly examples from the humanities. How does Manifold handle sort of STEM type things, equations, scientific notation, things like that?
Yeah, so we've had a lot of uptake in the humanities and as also in the social sciences. In math, there have been a few like math projects. The equations are tricky. So we're still working on being able to ingest like the math languages, but diagrams and graphs are not a problem. Anything that can be, because especially, I didn't show any examples of this, but you can ingest, you can include as part of your text, like interactive diagrams and graphs, like Giphy and different things like this. So you can include them as part of your text, or you can have them embedded as resources that you can click on and then it opens up in that window. But the equations, like math languages is tricky, and we're working on it. So
thanks. Brian was wondering if you see when you're teaching with material, students sort of skipping the resources and the margins, or feeling like that sort of their extra credit, non-essential things that you've put in there,
Yeah, I think it depends. It depends also on how you're using it in the class. Like if you're going to be expecting them, if it's an article that you're going to be expecting them to have read and that you're going to ask them questions about later, I think they're more likely to read those things. The things that I tend to embed are like explainers, or videos that go deeper into a context or sort of flesh something out. And in those cases, I think it's, I'm not sure about this because I'm not there while they're reading it, but I find that they'll reference it in their comments because they're kind of hungry for that explanation, about a topic that's confusing, like not feeling it as essential. Yeah,
I noticed in some cases folks were using it like to hear an audio version of a thing that's written on the page, or to see, a performance that's based on the text or something. It seems like a nice way to enhance like a static text.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just asking because I've done some surveys of students and some different platforms and things, and their response is that even putting it in a box made them feel like it was not essential. You know what I mean? That they had to interact or look at whatever's in that box. You know what I mean? They're like, oh, it's in the box, I'm just going to keep going. You know what I mean? I guess, sort of thing. And so I was curious on whether they had the same sort of view of if it's in the margins. You know what I mean? I guess, which
Yeah.
I think they would, looking at it, but that's not a criticism of the platform. I was just curious on, because I know you use it. You know what I mean? On whether you've heard that as well.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting question. I'm going to survey my students now and ask them if they're reading them. Because I know they like the videos, because they're videos and they feel, like a break from the text. But I know that, many of my students said that they really liked the annotations, that they, I got some comments, that were like, at first I really hated the annotations. And then, I found myself going back to them. And like, when I would feel really discouraged, it was nice to have my classmates explaining things in the margins that were confusing. And that like sort of made them feel like less alone. And something that I found was really interesting, because I started using Hypothesis was the first way that I was using collaborative annotations to teach. And one of the things that I found the most surprising about it was that like student annotations tend to cluster around particular passages, and they're not always the passages that I would expect. So, I would notice like there was this whole section that has a really important, interesting moment in it, and nobody had said anything about it. And so I found that it was as generative to sort of push students further in the places where everyone had clearly engaged with it, as it was to ask like, why did nobody annotate on like this major plot development? And the answer, it was often that they were confused or uncomfortable by something that happened there, and that it wasn't that they were like bored and disengaged. You know what I mean? So I started thinking of it as like a kind of like heat map of the text that that gave a lot of sort of surprising information about the way that students were engaging.
Yeah, the annotation's impressive. You know what I mean? I guess I have to say, is looking at what you've described. So
yeah. And also because I find whenever I make discussion boards that students tend to wander really far from the question or the text at hand, really quickly and then really far. And I found that the annotations in the margins just tend to, like, students would definitely like draw on their personal experience, but it just tended to hew closer to the text. And I don't know, like, if it's because it's visually connected to the text or what, but that's something I really like about social annotations as well.
Great. Any other questions for Krystyna? Okay. So Krystyna, I think we're gonna let you go, and then we're just gonna wrap up with our group here and talk about some next steps and what's coming next. Thank you so much for coming today and presenting on Manifold. Yes, please send me your slides and so I can share that with everyone.
I will. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Manifold app. I'm just putting the website in the chat. So yeah, and I'd be happy to answer any questions when I send out the slides. You'll have my email address. So I'm always happy to talk Manifold.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye.
Krystyna. Okay, great. So there's two very different options and presentations today. Any thoughts from folks from what you've heard so far, and thinking back to our conversation in June with Pressbooks and LibreTexts?
I thought it was interesting. I didn't know anything about either of these. You know what I mean? Which I knew quite a bit about Pressbooks and LibreTexts. I guess, and things. So these are totally different, options that I was not really familiar with. So most of it was totally me learning everything. You know what I mean? They're talking about it since I didn't know anything about them.
Great.
It was interesting to me to see like CUNY Academic Commons just to have basically all the stuff people had worked on. And then they added discussion groups, and that it's really interesting to see the templates and things they are doing, because the North Dakota University system has been talking about E-core, they've called it, where they want to put templates for courses and using open materials up on some kind of a shared site. And we've been a little nervous about it because when I started here, there was a lot of pushback initially for OERs, because the only objection was that faculty thought they were going to be pushed into using them and not have freedom to put whatever they wanted into their courses, and that's totally not what I was interested in doing. I'm not a chemistry professor. I dropped it in grade 11. Don't want to tell you what to use. Just want you to look at open resources as well as other ones. And my provost had said, she was really nervous about it, because she said if the faculty think we're trying to push them to use a specific template, they're going to explode. now, if it can be pitched as this is an option, especially for adjuncts, and your department should work on setting it up if you want, it might fly. But so far, the only place we've gotten any nibbles at UND is in Norwegian, because there's only one faculty member there anyways, and a couple of native studies classes. So, and I'm not that involved in that piece, and I don't want to become the face of it, because I think it's inappropriate for me to do it as the head of the libraries, to try to talk to the faculty about what they should be putting in their content. If we move forward on that, we've talked about having it as a joint thing of, me and the guy who's the head of our online education stuff, and he is a faculty member. So that's why I was so interested in it, and seeing it adopted elsewhere may be helpful here, and may help faculty deal with that sort of, are you pushing me to do this? It's totally not, but if that goes forward, I think it needs to be faculty and the library and others.
I think you're right. And I think the way, that came about at CUNY was because of COVID and because everyone was forced online. And it was really like, we know you're struggling, like, let us help you by putting these sort of things together for you that you can, manipulate and change and whatever, but at least you don't have to build the whole thing on your own. So, I think that was
and City Tech is great with that stuff, but the thing about City Tech is it's one of the community colleges at CUNY, and I notice a huge difference in responses between the community colleges and faculty at a research institution.
Yeah, I think you're definitely
So
right. It's a very different culture. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts? Brian, I see you noted you guys have talked about that as well. Shell courses and things. Any other thoughts on the presentation, or has this, made you think about other things that you might want to hear or that we should be talking about?
I thought they were, like Brian, I didn't know much about either of these projects. It was really super interesting to see them and to learn what they're up to. I think Manifold looks like a very nice tool. It's hard for me to see why, Pressbooks with H5P and with Hypothesis running, it seems like a lot of the functionality of Manifold is pretty basic text plus annotation, and like Pressbooks or a lot of platforms plus a Hypothesis do that. So not really clear to me what the advantage would be for that. And
I think she did mention a price difference, so that might be the
right. I mean,
thing.
She said, "Oh, Manifold is open source. Pressbooks is open source. You can self-host it, right?" So
if you have the resources to self-host it.
The thing about the Open Lab is it seemed like it's kind of an ecosystem, right? I mean, the templates, I don't know there's a lot of portability, right? You could, you have to get your whole campus, or at least some section of campus, to buy into building their courses that way. You're not going to be able to say, have someone build a template for some set of courses using the Open Lab, and then, okay, I don't want to use Open Lab, but I want to use that structure that was built for a course. That's just, you have to buy into that ecosystem. And
right.
Even LMSs, have like common cartridge exports, which have a little more portability than that, I think, does. I don't know. They were both great projects.
Yeah, I think he's describing, sometimes in OER there's the walled garden sort of phenomenon. You know what I mean? I guess where it can't necessarily, things can't go in and out, or it's not necessarily being all that discoverable. I guess, things are movable or portable, I guess, in things. And so I don't know what Jonathan's describing there too.
Yeah, I mean, I see some of the advantage of building in an open space like that. Allow that it starts open, as opposed to building in like a Blackboard or Canvas or something and then trying to export it or share it. It gets complicated. So I liked some of their more philosophical, like teaching in the open and things like that, sort of take it to another level beyond just openly licensing resources.
Very much.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're just about at time. So thank you all for joining us today. I know it's midsummer is always a tricky time. We will convene again at the beginning of August, and we're going to be hearing from some folks about different tools for specific to math and ways to author in math openly. So I'll be more information to come on which tools and who will be talking to us. I'm working on that. But I hope you guys can join us then, and we'll look forward to seeing you. Great. Thanks, everybody. Take care.